Have you ever wondered why the size of your penis has such a powerful effect on your confidence, on your erections, and even on how you show up in intimacy? Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and deep in your sense of identity as a man. And have you ever stopped to ask yourself whether the size women say they prefer is the same as the size you imagine they judge you by? These questions matter far more than most men admit, because the connection between penis size and male psychology is not just a cultural idea. It is a quiet force shaping performance, self-esteem, and the way men interpret every intimate moment. I am Dr. Emily Collins, a urologist who has spent years listening to men describe the hidden pressure they carry about their bodies. Many of them tell me that even when they have normal erection strength, good health, and satisfying sex, a single doubt about size can undermine everything. It affects how they initiate intimacy, how relaxed they feel with a partner, how easily they maintain an erection, and even how present they feel in their own skin. A man can have a perfectly healthy penis and still struggle emotionally because of comparison, fear, or old comments that echo for decades. And here is the surprising truth most men never hear: women do have preferences, but they are not what you think. What they find pleasant is influenced far more by comfort, connection, emotional safety, and confidence than by any measurement. Yet men grow up believing size defines masculinity, power, and desirability. This belief becomes so ingrained that it shapes performance anxiety, alters arousal, and disrupts sexual rhythm. Some men tense up the moment they start thinking about size, and that tension alone is enough to weaken an erection or shorten the experience. As a doctor, I see this pattern constantly. The penis responds to the mind, and when the mind is filled with doubt, the body cannot function at its best. Erections depend on relaxation, circulation, and presence. But when a man is worried about size, he disconnects from pleasure and enters a survival mode that sabotages his performance. The psychological impact becomes more damaging than any physical limitation. You may even have lived this yourself. Have you ever had an intimate moment interrupted by a sudden thought like, "What if I am not enough?" That single thought can collapse arousal, shrink confidence, and create tension that blocks natural blood flow. And the more often it happens, the deeper the fear becomes. You already know this topic affects you. But have you ever considered how it affects the women in your life even more? Their comfort, their emotional connection, and their pleasure depend heavily on your confidence, not your size. What you will discover as we continue may surprise you, and if any part of this has ever echoed in your life, share your thoughts in the comments so we can talk about it. And while you're here, leave a like and check if you're subscribed so you do not miss the insights coming next, because understanding this fully is the key to reclaiming your confidence. When we strip away the myths and the silent pressure men grow up carrying, the science tells a story that is far more reassuring and far more grounded in reality. Most men never see this data because it is rarely discussed openly. Yet when women are asked about their real preferences in private, confidential scientific studies, the results show something deeply important for every man who has ever felt insecure about his penis size. The vast majority of women consistently choose a range that falls within what most men already have. Not the extremes shown in media, not the exaggerated images men compare themselves to, and not the unrealistic versions that create quiet shame. What women actually find pleasant aligns much more with comfort, emotional connection, and erectile reliability than with measurements. Multiple studies conducted across different countries show the same pattern. Women rate girth as more relevant than length, but even then, their preferred range stays in the average zone. These findings reveal something essential about sexual psychology. Women want an experience that feels physically comfortable and emotionally safe, not something that creates fear of pain or disconnect. For them, chemistry, trust, and confidence shape pleasure far more than the few centimeters men obsess over. And yet, because men are conditioned to believe size defines masculinity, they interpret this data through a distorted lens. They assume women are being polite or hiding the truth, when in reality, women are simply valuing what actually matters for their bodies. Part of the misunderstanding comes from how male and female arousal systems evolved. Women rely on emotional and contextual stimulation much more than visual comparison. For many, the experience of being with a partner who is attentive, confident, and fully present is what creates satisfaction. A partner who is anxious, self-critical, or distracted by performance worries diminishes the experience, regardless of size. This means that the psychological impact of confidence on a woman's pleasure is far greater than men realize. A man who feels secure in his body, who is not silently measuring himself against others, naturally creates a sense of safety that enhances arousal for both sides. This is why so many women describe the best intimacy they have ever had not in terms of size, but in terms of connection, rhythm, and emotional alignment. They remember how the man made them feel rather than what he measured. Men, however, internalize different expectations. They grow up hearing jokes, comments, and cultural messages that equate size with worth. Over time, these beliefs become subconscious, shaping behavior long before a man consciously questions them. He may enter intimacy already worried about disappointing a partner, and that invisible fear becomes the real obstacle to pleasure. When we look deeper into the science, we also find that penile perception itself is often inaccurate. Studies show that many men underestimate their own size because they compare themselves to unrealistic images or view themselves from an angle that distorts proportions. At the same time, women consistently report perceiving their partner as larger than the man perceives himself. This gap in perception creates unnecessary emotional tension. A man may believe he is below average when he is not, and this belief alone can diminish erection quality, reduce libido, or trigger performance anxiety. Understanding these scientific truths allows men to reclaim a sense of grounding. Size is far less important to women than confidence, presence, and emotional attunement. The data is clear: most men already fall within the range women find pleasant. What matters now is shifting how the mind interprets this reality so the body can respond with more ease and less fear. Opening the path for deeper connection ahead. As we move deeper into this subject, it becomes impossible to ignore how the myths surrounding penis size were created in the first place. Men often assume their insecurities come from personal experiences or isolated comments, but the truth is that these beliefs were shaped long before adulthood. They were built by cultural messages, silent comparisons, distorted media, and the way boys internalize expectations around masculinity. By the time a man reaches his teens, he has already absorbed dozens of ideas about what size should be, and none of them come from science or real intimacy. They come from environments where exaggeration, humor, and unrealistic imagery dominate perception. Pornography plays a central role in this. From the first moment a young man sees adult content, his brain forms a comparison framework based on performers who are intentionally selected for extreme size. What he sees is not the norm, but his mind silently labels it as the standard. Over time, this becomes a source of quiet pressure, even if he logically understands that the industry exaggerates everything. The repetition shapes the subconscious, and the subconscious shapes performance. Men begin to believe they should match something that was never representative of real life. Then there are locker room comments, jokes among friends, and the competitive nature of early male social environments. Boys tease each other about size long before they even understand sexuality. These comments are rarely meant to be taken seriously, but the brain stores them in places that influence adult identity. A single comment made at age 14 can echo loudly at age 40, affecting the way a man undresses with a partner, how comfortable he feels being seen, or how confidently he initiates intimacy. What began as teenage bravado evolves into adult shame, even though the original belief was built on fiction. Media does the rest. Comedy routines, sitcoms, movies, and social media trends all reinforce the idea that bigger is better. The constant repetition turns exaggeration into expectation. Women in real life do not share this obsession, but men internalize it anyway, assuming that every partner must be silently comparing them to unrealistic ideals. This cognitive distortion fuels performance anxiety, alters arousal patterns, and shifts focus away from pleasure and connection. It is also important to recognize how the male brain processes visual information. Men are inherently more visually oriented in their sexuality, which makes them more susceptible to comparison and physical evaluation. When a man sees another man, even in a fictional context, with exaggerated proportions, his brain interprets it as competition. This competition mindset follows him into intimate situations, making him more self-critical and more attentive to perceived flaws. Meanwhile, his partner is often focused on emotional closeness, responsiveness, and the quality of the moment rather than physical extremes. These myths become so deeply ingrained that men begin policing themselves constantly. Even during a peaceful, loving moment with a partner, the mind may drift toward questions like, "Am I enough?" or "Does she wish I were bigger?" These intrusive thoughts are not based on her reactions, but on years of conditioning that taught men to evaluate themselves by size rather than by connection or skill. And when the mind is trapped in self-judgment, the body cannot relax. Erections weaken, rhythm breaks, and the natural flow of intimacy is interrupted. Understanding where these myths come from is the first step toward dissolving them. When men realize that these beliefs were never grounded in truth, they begin to release the pressure that has been silently shaping their sexuality for decades. And as that pressure dissolves, the body begins to respond differently, making space for the kind of confidence that enhances both performance and emotional connection moving forward. Once a man understands how myths are formed, the next step is recognizing how those beliefs translate directly into the body. Sexual performance is not just a physical process, it is deeply influenced by psychology. The penis reacts to the brain long before it reacts to touch, and this is where many men unknowingly sabotage themselves. When a man carries insecurity about his size, even subtly, his nervous system shifts into a state of performance monitoring. Instead of experiencing intimacy, he is evaluating himself in real time, and that mental shift immediately interferes with blood flow and arousal. What feels like a physical problem is often a psychological chain reaction that begins long before the erection weakens. Erections rely on relaxation and circulation. Smooth muscle tissue within the penis must loosen, blood vessels must expand, and the parasympathetic nervous system must be active. But when a man is anxious, ashamed, or worried about disappointing a partner, the opposite system takes over. The sympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for stress, becomes activated. Heart rate rises, breathing changes, and blood is redirected away from the pelvic region. Even small amounts of doubt can create enough tension to interrupt the natural process. This is why men who feel insecure about their size often struggle more with maintaining erections than men who feel confident, even when both are physically healthy. This loop becomes even stronger because the penis itself acts like a feedback system. If an erection softens for even a moment, the man interprets it as evidence that his insecurity is valid, which increases anxiety, which weakens the erection further. The cycle repeats until the man believes he has a physical dysfunction, when the real issue is psychological stress fueled by old beliefs. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of men's sexual health. Many men come to my clinic insisting they have circulation problems or hormonal decline, but once we address the psychological patterns, the body responds almost immediately. Women's psychology adds another layer to this dynamic. Contrary to what many men assume, a partner is far more affected by his confidence than by his size. When a man enters intimacy with reassurance in his body and ease in his expression, he creates an emotional environment where both people can relax. But when he carries self-doubt, women often sense the tension even if they don't know the cause. They may interpret his hesitation as lack of interest, distraction, or emotional distance, which creates their own form of anxiety. Two nervous systems begin feeding each other, and the experience becomes a cycle of misinterpretation rather than connection. This is why performance anxiety is often rooted in size insecurity even when the man never mentions it out loud. The concern silently shapes his rhythm, his breathing, his presence. Instead of feeling the moment, he is assessing it. Instead of feeling desire, he is scanning for signs of failure. The mind becomes a critic rather than a participant, and the body responds accordingly. Over time, this creates conditioned responses where the body associates intimacy with pressure rather than pleasure. Once that association forms, even a supportive partner and a calm environment may not be enough to restore natural function. The encouraging truth, however, is that the brain can unlearn these patterns. When men begin to understand that women's preferences are far more aligned with comfort, emotional safety, and connection than with size, something inside them begins to soften. The nervous system relaxes. The body grows more responsive. And the penis, which depends so heavily on psychological calm, begins to function with more ease and consistency. This shift is not theoretical, it is something I watch happen in real patients all the time. The moment the mind feels safe, the body follows. What comes next is exploring what women actually value physically, which often has nothing to do with size and everything to do with presence, sensation, and responsiveness. As we move deeper into what truly shapes female pleasure, something becomes unmistakably clear: the factors that matter most to women during intimacy rarely match the ones men obsess over. When researchers interview women privately, without any social pressure, their answers consistently highlight the same themes. They talk about comfort, connection, rhythm, stimulation, arousal buildup, and how safe they feel in the presence of their partner. What they rarely mention is size. In fact, many women describe size as far less relevant than the quality of the interaction, the emotional environment, and the way their partner responds to their signals. From a physiological standpoint, the structure of the female body reveals why this is true. The most sensitive part of the female anatomy is external, not internal. Pleasure is concentrated in nerve-rich areas that respond to touch, pressure, warmth, and emotional arousal. Internal sensitivity varies widely, and for many women, deeper penetration contributes far less to pleasure than men imagine. This is why technique, pacing, and attentiveness matter infinitely more than any measurement. Women describe their best intimate experiences in terms of feeling understood, stimulated, emotionally connected, and fully engaged with their partner, not in terms of length or girth. Girth does play a role in sensation for some women, but even there the preference folds neatly into the range most men already fall into. What matters more is firmness, consistency of erection, and the ability to maintain rhythm without tension or anxiety. These are functions tied directly to circulation, arousal buildup, and a man's ability to remain mentally present. A firm, stable erection created by good blood flow and calm focus provides far more satisfaction than any extreme size would. And when a man feels confident enough to stay in the moment rather than evaluate himself, the experience becomes physically richer for both partners. Emotional attunement is another key element. Women often say that their highest pleasure comes from a partner who senses their shifts in breath, movement, and energy, adjusting pace naturally rather than performing mechanically. This requires presence, sensitivity, and internal confidence, the very qualities that insecurity about size tends to diminish. When a man is focused on comparison, he cannot fully read his partner's signals. He becomes disconnected from the moment, and she feels that disconnection instantly. But when he is relaxed and confident in his body, he becomes more intuitive, more responsive, and more in sync with her natural rhythm. For many women, the emotional atmosphere during intimacy forms the foundation of their physical pleasure. They want a partner who makes them feel seen, valued, desired, and safe. That emotional connection enhances blood flow, increases lubrication, and intensifies sensation. The female body responds to trust and comfort with far more intensity than it responds to size. This is why some women report that even encounters with partners who were objectively large felt uncomfortable or emotionally flat, while experiences with average-sized partners who were confident, attentive, and emotionally present felt deeply satisfying. In the clinical setting, I hear this pattern repeatedly. Women say the same things. A man who is confident in his body is far more attractive, far more arousing, and far more satisfying than a man who fixates on size or performance. Confidence creates ease. Ease creates connection. Connection amplifies pleasure. And when these elements are present, size becomes almost irrelevant. What matters is the man's ability to bring presence, patience, and emotional depth into the experience. Understanding these realities not only relieves pressure but also opens the door to a healthier, more empowered version of masculinity. When a man stops chasing a myth and starts embracing what truly influences pleasure, he becomes more capable, more connected, and more confident in ways that transform intimacy. And from here, the next step is understanding how men can rebuild that confidence from the inside out, without relying on comparison or unrealistic expectations. Once a man begins to understand what actually matters for female pleasure, a natural question emerges: how does he rebuild genuine confidence when years of comparison, anxiety, and cultural pressure have shaped the way he sees his body? Confidence does not return simply because someone tells you that size is not the determining factor. It comes from reshaping the internal narrative, strengthening the relationship with your own body, and creating experiences that reinforce a healthier identity. Many men discover that their insecurities were never about their penis itself, but about what they believed it represented. When those beliefs begin to shift, performance improves not because the body changes, but because the mind finally allows it to function freely. A crucial step in rebuilding confidence is learning to reconnect with the body without judgment. Men often approach intimacy with a performance mindset, constantly evaluating how they are doing rather than experiencing what they are feeling. This creates distance between mind and sensation. When a man abandons judgment and starts listening to his body instead of monitoring it, erections become more stable, arousal becomes more natural, and the entire experience flows with less tension. This shift requires practice, but it is transformative. The nervous system responds to permission, not pressure, and the penis performs best when the mind is not scrutinizing every detail. Another essential element is understanding the role of physical health in sexual confidence. Circulation, testosterone balance, sleep quality, stress levels, and cardiovascular health all play significant roles in erection strength and stamina. When men take steps to improve these areas, even small changes produce noticeable results. Stronger erections naturally increase confidence, and that confidence reinforces better performance. It becomes a positive cycle that counteracts the years of negative associations tied to size. A man begins to realize that his body is capable, responsive, and reliable. Not something to be judged against imaginary standards. Communication with partners also influences confidence more than men expect. Women respond positively to openness, presence, and vulnerability far more than to physical metrics. When a man engages emotionally, listens to feedback, and creates a space where both partners can relax, intimacy becomes more genuine. This emotional connection reduces anxiety and allows the body to function without interruption. It also builds trust within the relationship, letting the man experience intimacy as a shared journey rather than a test he must pass. Even the way a man mentally frames intimacy matters. Instead of viewing sex as something he must perform perfectly, reframing it as a mutual exploration reduces pressure. When a man sees intimacy as connection rather than evaluation, he becomes more attuned to his partner's needs and more present in his own. This presence enhances rhythm, timing, responsiveness, and sensuality, all of which impact female pleasure far more than size. The more he experiences the benefits of presence, the less he feels the need to compare himself to unrealistic ideals. Another powerful shift occurs when men stop focusing on flaws and begin recognizing the strengths they already possess. Every man has unique qualities that make him desirable, whether emotional intelligence, passion, attentiveness, or masculinity expressed through confidence rather than comparison. When these strengths are acknowledged and embraced, they reshape identity from the inside out. A man becomes less defined by measurements and more defined by presence, awareness, and the ability to create a meaningful experience. As these internal transformations take root, men often notice that their partners respond differently too. A man who enters intimacy with confidence, relaxation, and emotional engagement becomes more attractive on every level. His partner feels safer, more aroused, and more connected. This energy feeds back into his self-perception, strengthening the sense that he is enough, that he is desirable, and that his body is fully capable of fulfilling both his pleasure and hers. And as this momentum grows, a man begins to realize that true confidence is not about competing with unrealistic standards. It is about reclaiming autonomy over his body, embracing his natural strengths, and experiencing intimacy without the weight of old insecurities shaping every moment that unfolds next. As a man starts to rebuild confidence from within, something deeper begins to shift. He no longer enters intimacy carrying the silent question of whether he measures up. Instead, he approaches it with presence, ease, and a sense of ownership over his body. This internal transformation changes everything. Performance anxiety loosens its grip. Erections become more consistent because the mind is no longer fighting itself. A man who feels grounded in his identity stops focusing on what he thinks he lacks and begins recognizing what he brings to the moment. That shift is powerful enough to reshape his entire sexual experience and the experience of the woman beside him. Women sense this change instantly. Confidence creates warmth. Warmth creates connection. And connection deepens arousal. When a man is no longer trapped inside his thoughts about size, he becomes more attuned, more responsive, and more emotionally present. Instead of performing, he is participating. Instead of evaluating himself, he is engaging with his partner. This presence is what makes women feel desired, appreciated, and understood. It enhances their physical pleasure far more than any physical trait ever could. What becomes clear is that satisfaction grows out of emotional synchrony, responsive touch, and genuine intention, not out of measurements that never determined compatibility in the first place. This is why so many women describe their most fulfilling intimate experiences with men who made them feel safe, cherished, and deeply connected. These experiences leave a lasting impression because they reach beyond the physical act. They speak to trust, energy, rhythm, and emotional resonance. A man who expresses himself confidently, who listens, adapts, and shares the moment without fear, becomes unforgettable. And the more he allows himself to embrace this truth, the more natural intimacy becomes. His body responds with fewer barriers, his erections strengthen, and his performance aligns with a mind that is settled rather than anxious. These insights reveal something that often goes unspoken. A man's greatest strength in intimacy is not the size of his penis but the stability of his presence. When he shows up with confidence instead of comparison, both bodies relax into the experience. The nervous system becomes an ally instead of an obstacle, allowing pleasure to grow organically. Moments of connection deepen. Touch becomes more meaningful. The entire encounter becomes richer because it is rooted in authenticity rather than fear. As a urologist, I see the transformation in men who embrace this truth. They stop trying to meet unrealistic expectations and begin cultivating a version of masculinity that is grounded, capable, and emotionally intelligent. This is where real growth happens. This is where true satisfaction begins. And this is where intimacy becomes something a man creates, not something he measures. And if you have followed this journey all the way here, it already shows something important about you. You are not just searching for answers. You are building a new relationship with your body, one based on clarity rather than comparison. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment saying this message was for me so I know you reached this point. And if these insights helped you understand your confidence differently, hit the like button and consider subscribing, because I want to continue guiding you through everything that shapes male sexual health. There is another video right here that expands this conversation in a way that will strengthen your confidence even more. Go ahead, click and continue with me there.